My name is Malini Mehra. I'm the Chief Executive of Globe Legislators and your host in the Parliamentary Pavilion. And I'm absolutely delighted that we've been able to arrange a special parliamentary briefing today. And this is with the International Climate Council's network. And we're here to address some very, very important questions which come up time and again when we are discussing climate change legislation and the role of independent advisory bodies. And those questions include: what difference do national climate councils make? And why have they come together in this new International Climate Council's network that we're very much looking forward to partnering with? So I'm very proud to introduce somebody who's well known to the Globe family, and that's Carla Hills. And Carla is at E3G. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction, and you can please introduce your roles in fuller later. And next to Carla is Peter Mølgaard, and Peter is the chair of the Danish Council on Climate Change. I'm careful to get the words right because they're not exactly the same. And next to Peter is Åsa Persson, and Åsa is the chair of the Swedish Climate Policy Council. So with that introduction, Carla, I'm going to hand over to you, please, to introduce the subject further. Thank you.
Thank you, Malini, and thank you, Globe, for hosting us this afternoon. It's great to be here. We have about 7 of the members of the International Climate Council's network from around the world attending COP29, so we're really pleased to be here for the week. This is the first year that we've had a secretariat for the International Climate Council's network, so that's been a really big milestone. The network was actually launched in 2021 by a group of councils, and I'll explain what that is in a moment and give a few introductions there. And the members really wanted to create a network which would allow them to share practice and learn from each other, and also really look at the special role that climate councils play within governance for climate change. And looking back over the last sort of decade or more, we've seen the emergence of climate laws in different forms and in different places. I'll mention a couple of examples where we have a combination of a climate law and a climate council. One that people are familiar with is the UK Climate Change Act, and it was one of the first framework laws adopted by the UK Parliament in 2008. And that created the Committee on Climate Change, which is the statutory advisor to the UK government on everything related to climate change. So that is one well-known example. But we actually have councils that have a range of different mandates. So not all of them have a base in statute, in law. South Africa is a really interesting example because they were created as the Presidential Commission to advise South Africa's government and to work with multiple stakeholders to bring people together and look at South Africa's just transition. They were set up as an advisor to the president, and in the middle of this year, they have also been now formally mandated through legislation. So the parliamentarians in South Africa have played a really key role in kind of taking South Africa's journey to the next level. And South Africa is also one of the members of the International Climate Council's network and is here at COP29. So what makes these bodies special? They have some kind of official mandate. So as I've said, that can come from different places. It can come from the law. It could come from some other kind of decree. But what that makes that special is that they are this kind of link between science and evidence and the governments. So they really are advising government. And so they have a very privileged position in that they are experts, but they're kind of the bridge between science that may come from the International Panel on Climate Change or other science and evidence, and getting that to policymakers in a form that is relevant to the transitions that they need to make, the targets that they need to set, and the pathways that they need to follow. They are so very much official mandates, they're evidence-based, and they can include a range of experts, but a range also of different kinds of stakeholders. And so they also frequently run consultative processes, and we can hear from our panelists here to give us some more examples. So I'm going to halt there and invite Peter to give us a bit of an introduction to the Danish Climate Council. You are the chair of the council, Peter. Do tell us more. Peter, you're also the president of the Copenhagen Business School, so you bring the kind of business perspective to the table. And I think one of the things we're interested in talking about, given that this is a finance COP, is also the role of the private sector and the role of climate councils in getting stronger climate governance and helping create investor certainty. So, Peter.
Oh, that's a huge task you're giving me, Carla. So thank you for that. I was going to start mainly with first of all saying that we really appreciate in Denmark being part of the ICCN, the International Climate Councils Network, because we can share information, get ideas, and both on the governance, but also on the content of our analysis, and that's hugely valuable. The Danish Council on Climate Change was established 10 years ago by the first Climate Act in Denmark, and has progressed to now consist of 9, well, I normally call them eggheads like myself, so professors of a variety of different disciplines that we need to attack the climate crisis and the climate policy in Denmark. So it's a very independent body of experts, and we are self-selecting new members. So you can sit 2 times 4 years as a member of the Danish Council on Climate Change, and then we invite universities in Denmark and abroad. Actually, we have 2 Norwegian colleagues to join the council, so that we are complete in terms of what we need at that particular point in time. So we are rather independent, and yet we have been financed and refinanced for 10 years by a number of different governments, both left-leaning and right-leaning, and I think that shows that we have a role to play, independent of you could say party politics, because we are the sort of a neutral voice in the debate, and I think that has a huge value. Now, in 2020, we got a new Climate Act, and in that we have a very particular. We have 3 roles to play. We have the role of a watchdog. So we are actually monitoring if government is progressing towards the targets that are established by the Act. Example of those targets would be that we have a 70% reduction target in 2030 compared with 1990. So relatively ambitious reduction targets. Right now we are around 50%. So in the next 5 years we'll have to add another 20 percentage points. And we are assessing if government's policy, Parliament's policy, would be going in the right direction. So far, 4 times in a row, we have said it's not yet been made likely that we reach those targets. We are going to come up with a report again, a status report in February, and then assess if by that time we think that the climate policy in Denmark is likely to meet the target of 30% in 2030. So that's the watchdog role. Another role we have is as a policy advisor, and there we give very independent advice. Nobody tells us what to do, so we basically come up with an analysis, and one analysis that comes out in 2 weeks' time would be advising the government on its 2035 target and how to include that in the law. In that, we're not giving Parliament and government if one number, rather than giving them a number of different scenarios and the pros and cons of going in that direction. So it's a political decision to decide exactly what the number should be, but we can give pros and cons as to different numbers. And the last role we have, which is one that I'm doing right now, is we engage in public debate, and that takes many forms and shapes, including lots of media appearances in Denmark, but also going to Parliament. Whenever we have a report out, we are typically invited, if it's sufficiently important at least, we are invited to Parliament, to the Parliamentary Committee responsible for climate issues, to give evidence and to explain our report and our findings. And that's also something that I think has value. And typically, again, all political parties would be present and ask questions and also sometimes be critical of what we do. But I think we have a very high reputation for being independent, and therefore they also listen to us. And I think you can see that it's not always as immediate as we would want it, but typically the politicians listen to us and incorporate our advice in one way or other into politics. It takes time, but it is there. Let me finish with that bright note and then hand over, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, let's hear from Asa as to the situation in Sweden, and as the chair of the Swedish Climate Policy Council, please tell us more, I guess, about what is the key role, and what are the similarities and differences, I suppose, and what are some of the key things that you've seen as you've become the chair of the council.
Thank you very much, Carla, and thank you, Globe, for organizing this. So, I mean, I can actually keep it quite short because there are quite a few similarities with the Danish council and indeed many of the other councils in the international network. The Swedish council is a proud founding member also of ICCN, and I think very exciting now that as we see the interest from other countries and to establish these kinds of councils, also given the era we are in now with the climate transition and the Paris Agreement process, to have these bodies to advise and evaluate. In Sweden, the council is a product of the climate legislation that was adopted in 2017. So we are now 7 years old, a little bit younger than the Danish one. So the parliamentary committee that developed the Swedish climate legislation, they looked outside, they looked to the UK, took inspiration from their climate change committee. But interestingly, they also looked inwards and actually modeled our council on a fiscal policy council. So previous parliament had adopted fiscal goals, and they felt the need also for an independent body to actually monitor the goals and advise parliament on, to the extent the government is achieving those goals. So I think that is an interesting also observation here, how parliaments around the world can look to other existing institutions and model climate councils on those. So we have also, similar to in Denmark, we have an advisory role. We try to look to the future, what are emerging issues. Of course, listening to what's going on here at the climate negotiations, trying to also, of course, follow what's happening in Brussels, in the EU, and try to maybe perhaps not provide the most short-term immediate advice on detailed policy design, because we have other systems of doing that in Sweden to appoint committees and inquiries. So we take a little bit more longer time perspective, a little bit more foresight, maybe a 5 to 10 year perspective to try and help government and parliament to stay ahead of the curve. So that's the advisory role. We also have a very strong evaluative role, and maybe particularly strong if we compare with some other councils in ICCN. So we have a very clear mandate to monitor the Swedish climate targets and evaluate the extent to which overall government policy is compatible with the targets. So that's also very important to us. We don't only look at the climate labeled policies or that part of the government budget, but really government policy overall, energy, transport, infrastructure, etc. And we publish an annual report where we present this evaluation. We also have this opportunity to select themes. So we're actually going to look at agriculture in the forthcoming report, and we looked a lot at the Danish Council's analysis to help us in that. The last task is public debate, information, and we also have actually a software tool to help us in that, a panorama tool, which we're happy to share with others. And finally, I think we are quite a small council, quite a lean secretariat. But what we find is that our primary audience, and actually who we formally report to, is the government. So they listen, and they also need to respond to our recommendations on an annual basis.
The Parliament listens, and similar to in Denmark, the Council has existed in Sweden over multiple governments. So I think that gives that continuity and credibility that you referred to. So we report to government, but what we see is that there is a range of stakeholders actually using our report, and maybe that's the biggest source of impact on public debate in Sweden. So yeah, let me stop here, but quite a few similarities.
Thanks, Asa. And I mean, I want to kind of come on and talk based on those examples, but also your experience and thoughts about how countries can strengthen their climate governance, I suppose, and the role of climate councils, and what are why should a country consider this? And I suppose we're speaking specifically to parliamentarians, and this is always a journey, right? I mean, most countries have some, they have their strategies, they have their nationally determined contributions, they have plans and so on. There's a number of countries, I think around 60, that have now moved to having some kind of climate law in place. And then, as we mentioned before, a number of bodies. At the moment in the network, we have about 25 members. They're nationally mandated councils. We have a couple of new members or new councils that are forming. Nigeria has a new council. We have Ukraine has a green transition office. They're working in partnership with the UK on that and thinking about their response and reconstruction. So why should countries and why should parliamentarians, I suppose, be interested in the role of these councils, and what would be the kind of value add? And I guess just to kind of say there as well, I think there is also increasingly some more evidence around what the impact is and what the benefits are, both of climate laws, but also of advisory bodies and climate councils. But yeah, just interested in your perspective of what would you see the key considerations being, and maybe start with you, Asa.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key question. I think, of course, one very important reason is just to have better informed policy. I mean, this is an unprecedented transition we are making, in the words of the IPCC. So we need, the best available information we can have to support parliamentarians in this task. So that's, of course, one important aspect. But I think also accountability. And again, I think actually the parliamentarians adopting climate legislation 5 or 10 years ago had, really took their responsibility and giving societies a good shot at pursuing this massive change. I think what we see now is that it is very tempting to postpone and delay action as we get closer to the 2030 deadline. So having these systematic processes and frameworks, action plans, etc., gives that sort of pace that we need. And of course, you also need the watchdog to ensure that this is translating, the plans are translating into action. So information, evidence-based, but also accountability. And I think what I see in the Swedish landscape is that we need, and I think we have, an accountability ecosystem. It's not the Climate Council alone that will inform climate policy, but we have other government agency, audit institutions, media, academia, etc. But I think having a specific climate council with a very specific and clear mission and task is very helpful for focusing the attention needed.
Thank you, Peter. Your thoughts?
Same thoughts. Really, a science-based advice I think is important, and I also think the constancy, we have been giving advice through COVID-19, through the war in Ukraine, and that takes political attention away from a very important international crisis, the climate crisis, and we need to be able to address that constantly. And therefore, it's important that we, even through COVID, even through the war, we can keep communicating this and keep the attention of politicians to this important issue. So very much agree with what you just said, Åsa, and just adding that being independent and independent of party politics as well, that gives us credibility, which is, I think, quite important for, at least when we talk to the Danish Parliament.
Thank you both. That's great. I'm going to draw us to a close, and thank you both, Peter and Asa, and also again to Globe for sharing the space with us today. Also, we have a reception happening in a little while, so if you're able to join us, we'll provide details. And thank you to those online as well as in the room. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We didn't have that much time, but I think this was extremely informative. And from the parliamentary perspective and from Globe's perspective also, I think that, as you said, there are a number of benefits to parliaments, to policy making, specifically in terms of informing better decision making, holding the executive and parliament to account. But there's another very important one, and that is to build public support. Because what we see is that, in particular in political contexts where there is such political polarization, that people tend to take very polarized positions on this. Globe is strictly a cross-party network of members of parliament, and we have from the very beginning realized that for climate change legislation to be successful and implemented, it takes cross-party work, because it has to be beyond that particular administration and particular affiliation. So the work that you're doing, and this is why we're very keen to make sure that there are independent bodies that are advising governments, but in particular parliaments everywhere, we wish to support that work. I just want to point out something which is a very recent development, and that is that today we launched in Azerbaijani the national version of a parliamentarian's guide to climate change, which was produced just 1 month ago by the University of Exeter, which is home to the world's largest number of climate scientists in any institution. So this was a publication by University of Exeter and Peers for the Planet, which is one of our member organizations. And Globe decided that, well, we're going to take it upon us to translate this into all of the Troika languages, starting with Azerbaijani, because in this country there is a very strong belief that policy making should be guided by the best science. There are a number of very strong, large, historic scientific institutions, but they don't necessarily have a relationship with the parliament. The parliament here is relatively new. They don't have any special groups or bodies within parliament to address these issues. So this is really very timely, because the conclusion of our launch was we need to work much more closely with the parliament here to build that relationship with the national scientific institutions. And actually, the Baku State University, which is the country's largest university and science university, is going to be translating this. Well, we have translated it, but they're going to print it and make it available to all of the institutions in the country. So you can see the impact that can have. Because once you've got all of the scientific community engaged on this, it builds that credibility and that relationship and that confidence in one another to work together. So thank you very much for joining us at really very short notice. We hope that there will be many members of Parliament who will be attending your reception. And I'll bring this to a close now, but this will be available on our recordings, on our playlist. So thank you very much for taking the time, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Thank you.